The offseason has begun, and the Orioles have a new rich owner, which means the rumor mill is already swirling around Baltimore. The O's have been connected to 3 All-Stars. We'll talk about how they could all fit in Baltimore. Coming up on this episode of the Locked On Orioles podcast.
You are Locked On Orioles, your daily Baltimore Orioles podcast. Part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
Hey there, Orioles fans. Today is Monday, November 11th, 2024, and welcome back into the Locked On Orioles podcast, part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day. As always, I'm your host, Connor Newcomb, and coming up on today's episode, we're going to take a look at some of the early offseason rumors regarding the Orioles. Over the past few days, O's have been connected to some big names: Max Fried, Garrett Crochet, and Teoscar Hernandez. The Orioles reportedly showing interest in all 3. We'll break down how they could each help the Orioles and what they might cost this offseason. Coming up on this episode of the Locked On Orioles podcast, which is brought to you by Game Time. Download the Game Time app, create an account, and use code LOCKEDONMLB for $20 off your first purchase. So this is going to be happening throughout the offseason, I think more than it has in a long time, because with David Rubenstein now the owner of the Orioles, this is his first offseason. All the talk has been the O's are going to open up the checkbook much more than they had, at least recently, under the Angelos family. And with a team that has been great, but has been swept out of the playoffs in back-to-back years, they are looking to add, whether it be in free agency or via trade this offseason. And when you're a bigger player, money-wise, you get connected to guys a lot more frequently when it comes to that offseason rumor mill. And it has already begun. And we'll start with the first one from Friday. John Heyman of the New York Post, one of the more well-known baseball reporters out there, reported on Friday that the Orioles, along with the Blue Jays and the Red Sox, are interested in left-handed pitcher Max Fried. And the Orioles absolutely should be interested in Max Fried. There's really no surprise here. The O's need pitching, and Fried is one of the best guys out there on the free agent market this year. And when we're talking about free agents this offseason, back on Friday, I did my Orioles free agent backup catcher wish list. Make sure to go back and check that one out, as James McCann is a free agent. Will they bring him back, or will they go elsewhere to back up Adley in 2025? But as we go through these wish lists and talk about the rumors and all these free agents or trade candidates the Orioles could add this offseason, I want to kind of give you the green flags and the red flags for each of these guys. So let's talk about the green flags for Max Fried, who is coming off another great season with the Atlanta Braves. The 30-year-old left-hander, he will turn 31 in January, made 29 starts for the Braves and threw 174 and a third innings. He posted a 3.25 ERA this year with a 23% strikeout rate and an 8% walk rate for Atlanta. And one of the biggest green flags for Max Fried is that he's just been so consistently good since he first got to the big leagues. He debuted in 2017 with Atlanta. That year and in 2018, he kind of bounced back and forth between the big leagues and AAA, but he finally solidified himself in 2019. He made 30 starts for that Braves team and had a 4.02 ERA. This 3.25 ERA he had in 2024 was the highest since then. He was awesome in the shortened season in 2020. He was great in 2021. He had definitely his best big league season in 2022, where he threw a career high 185 and a third innings and had a 2.48 ERA, and backed it up with a 2.55 last year, despite the fact that he only made 14 starts due to some injury concerns. But the consistency of being that good is awesome. And honestly, the other green flag is, in terms of cost, the Orioles should be opening up the checkbook much more under David Rubenstein, but there's still going to be a limit on what Mike Elias is going to be willing to pay in terms of years and money for a starting pitcher, with pitcher injuries being so prevalent. But the projections for Max Fried in free agency are, I don't want to say well below, but definitely below what they are for Corbin Burnes. So while it looks like Burnes could get to $250 million out there and is looking for 8, 9, 10 years, the projection on Max Fried from MLB Trade Rumors is 6 years, $156 million. Now that's still a lot of money, but that is only $26 million per year. And for a pitcher who's as good as Max Fried, who can be the ace of your rotation, that's worth $26 million a year. And for 6 years, for a 31-year-old, that's a large commitment. But if you think about the big time pitchers like Burns, who are looking for 8, 9, 10 plus years, if you only have to give out 6 years to Max Fried and, about 150 million for what pitching costs, that would be a pretty good deal if you can get him for that. And the Orioles should be absolutely willing to make that deal. The other green flags are like, he can just get you out in so many different ways. He had solid strikeout rates, really low walk rates throughout his career, has never really had any kind of walk issues, which is awesome to see despite having really, really good stuff. He gives up not a lot of home runs, got low homer rates, and that's because guys don't hit him hard. Like last year, a 5% barrel rate against him, a 35% hard hit rate. That guys just do not square up Max Fried, and that leads to him not giving up a lot of home runs. And when you add that to a few amount of walks, you're just not giving up big innings. Games aren't getting away from you. Even when you don't have your best stuff, you're still going 6 innings, 2 or 3 runs because you can just find different ways to get guys out. And he uses such a varied approach, does Max Fried. He goes up there with 7 different pitches, 4-seamer, curveball, sinker, changeup, sweeper, slider, cutter. He'll throw them all at you at different times. Now, the curveball is the pitch that Fried is known for, big time movement, big 75 mile per hour looping curveball. Opponents hit 154 against it, but his sweeper is devastating against lefties. Opponents hit just 167 against that pitch. It's quite the combo for Max Fried, and it's just like exactly what you want for a lefty at the top of your rotation. And again, he's not going to make as much money as Corbin Burns. Maybe that's the sweet spot for the Orioles, and obviously the interest is already there for Max Fried. Now, in terms of the red flags, there are some red flags here, and the big one is the injury. Now, Fried has been pretty durable over the past few years. Like, he reached 165 in 2019, shortened season in 2020, but then 165 again in 2021, and then 185 in 2022. That's good progression for a guy in his mid to late 20s. But then he started having forearm issues. And although, he threw 14 starts and had a 2.55 ERA in 2023, he missed a good chunk of that 2023 season with some forearm stuff. And that is not at all what you want. He lost a good amount of time on the injured list, and the forearm is generally something that concerns you because a lot of times when guys end up getting Tommy John surgery, the first report is forearm stiffness, forearm strain, forearm soreness. Then it moves to elbow stiffness, elbow soreness. Then it's Tommy John surgery. That's what happened to John Means 2 years ago, back when he got his first Tommy John in 2022. It was like forearm, elbow, TJ, all happened in like 2 or 3 weeks. Now, that didn't happen to Fried, right? He missed a good amount of time with the forearm strain last year, but he came back. He pitched this year. Then he missed a little bit of time this year, basically a month from like mid-August to mid-September with more forearm soreness. Now, he did come back and pitch at the end of the year for the Braves and was still good when he came back in September. So that's certainly a good sign, but that is now back-to-back years with a forearm issue. And that just makes you a little concerned that that's going to lead to something else. Even if it doesn't lead to full-blown Tommy John, it makes you concerned that, has it been fully healed? Is it going to crop up again? And as he now, gets into his 30s, again, he'll be 31 next season. Does it become more and more of a recurring issue for a guy that you might be giving 5, 6, 7 years in a deal? So that is something certainly to think about. And the other interesting thing for Max Fried, I think the thought is that left-handed starting pitchers actually fit better for the Orioles and fit better at Camden Yards because lefties are more likely to get hit harder by righties. They're more likely to give up home runs to righties. Lefties generally just much better against left-handed hitters. And the way the ballpark is built now, it's much harder for a righty to hit a home run with the wall out there than it is for a lefty. So the thought is that lefties would actually fit better for the O's. But for Max Fried, it's kind of different. First of all, he is a big-time ground ball pitcher, so the home runs, as I mentioned, just don't become as much of an issue. Like, he's got that fastball sinker combination at 93, 94, and his 59.2% ground ball rate was second highest among all qualified big league starters in 2024. Like, he is a huge ground ball pitcher. But the weird thing about Max Fried is he's actually, across his career, been better against right-handed hitters than lefties, and he had a big-time split in 2024 where he was way better, especially when it comes to the power. Last year, lefties hit 321 against him, while righties hit 200, and lefties slugged 464, while righties slugged 273 against Max Fried this season. That is a large split for a left-handed pitcher to have those reverse splits. So honestly, he almost works more like a common righty at Oriole Park. So the big wall really wouldn't help Max Fried as much as it would other pitchers. And if you combine that with the issues with the forearm, maybe it gives you a little bit of pause. But overall, I'm still very, very in on the O's getting, especially if it's if it ends up being like a 6-year, $150 million deal. I am in for that for Max Fried. I understand the injury risk, but listen, there is injury risk for every single pitcher in Major League Baseball. That's just the reality of the game here as we head into 2025. So with a guy with that track record, man, that would be a great fit at the top of the rotation, especially if Corbin Burnes signs elsewhere. But Max Fried wasn't the only top of the rotation left-hander that has been connected to the Orioles in the past week or so. There was another one who was a trade target, was actually a trade target at the deadline last year. But Garrett Crochet was not moved. He almost certainly would be moved this offseason. Could the Orioles be a fit? We'll talk about that coming up next. But first, this episode of the Locked On Orioles podcast is brought to you by FanDuel. Now listen, we've got everything going on in the sports world, but you can get ready to tackle the NFL action with FanDuel, America's #1 sportsbook. Because right now, new customers can bet $5 and get $150 in bonus bets if you win. The FanDuel Sportsbook app gives you everything you need to place live bets on the NFL all in one place. So when you get a hunch in the middle of the game, you can check out the latest stats, you can view live play-by-play, and so much more on that same exact page where you place your bets. So just visit FanDuel.com to join today. You'll get started with $150 in bonus bets if you win your first $5 bet. That's FanDuel.com. Never waste a hunch and make every moment more with FanDuel, an official sportsbook partner of the NFL. And today's episode of the Locked On Orioles podcast is also brought to you by the DK Law Group. The DK Law Group is a Maryland-based law firm who is redefining the legal process with their modern approach. DK Law Group specializes in real estate law, estate planning, business law, and family law. They're tech savvy, they treat clients like family, and they focus on keeping your legal solutions simple. And one of the things you'll quickly notice with the DK Law Group is their transparent pricing. They believe in clarity and cost, and that no one should be left in limbo. So contact the DK Law Group today at dklawmd.com. And Locked On Orioles listeners can call today to schedule a free 30-minute consultation when you mention the tagline, Empowering Legacies. So the Orioles were connected to top-of-the-rotation left-hander Max Fried last week, and they were also connected to top-of-the-rotation left-hander Garrett Crochet. Now, Sean McAdam, who covers the Red Sox over at Mass Live, reported this week that the Boston Red Sox were interested in trading for Garrett Crochet. Now, he also kind of expanded on that story on a podcast interview and also talked about how the Orioles would be a fit and are reportedly interested in Crochet as well. Now, again, McAdam, not a national reporter, not an Orioles reporter, so it wasn't clear how much was speculation and how much was reporting. But either way, Crochet is absolutely a clear fit for the Orioles, and the Orioles should be one of many teams who are calling the White Sox this offseason. Now, Garrett Crochet, you may know the story of him. He comes back from Tommy John surgery this year for the White Sox, and he had been a power reliever out of Tennessee when he was drafted in 2020. They sent him right to the big leagues after the draft that year, and the White Sox said, you know what? Let's turn you back into a starter, and it worked. He made 32 starts this year. Now, they kind of treated him with kid gloves down the stretch, and he was doing like 2 and 3 inning starts in September to keep his innings count down a bit. But he made 32 starts. He threw 146 innings, and he had a 3.58 ERA with a 2.69 FIP this season. That tells you that, he was pitching in front of a terrible White Sox defense, and even an average defense would have made him much, much better ERA-wise this year. Combine that with a 35% strikeout rate and a 5.5% walk rate, just insane numbers that Garrett Crochet was throwing up there. And he is going to be a free agent after 2026, so he's got 2 more full seasons of team control. He's only going to be owed about $3 million in arbitration in 2025. That is nothing for the production he gave you, and you're still worried about health, but he is just coming off Tommy John, and not saying it can't happen again. We saw what just happened to John Means, getting Tommy John, and then 2 years later has to get it again. But this is someone who showed he has durability. Like, at the big leagues, he threw 6 innings, 54 innings, 12 innings, and then 146 innings last year. That's why the White Sox really limited him. So you could, if he stays healthy, count on, I would think, 160 plus innings at least from Garrett Crochet in 2025. And at worst, he's a shutdown reliever, but he could continue to be. And again, I'd like to see another year out of him, but that's like the biggest green flag for Garrett Crochet is like those strikeout rates versus those walk rates as a starter are just insane. Those are reliever type numbers that he just translated directly to throwing 5, 6, 7 innings at a time and was still that dominant. And if you look at the stuff that Crochet has, I mean, first of all, the other green flag is, I mean, if you're watching on the Locked On Orioles YouTube page, of course, make sure to like, comment, and subscribe, but you can see his Baseball Savant page I'm pulling up right here. I mean, you're not going to find a much more beautiful Savant page. Besides a 9% barrel rate allowed, like everything else is just dominance, absolute dominance. Chase rate, whiff rate, strikeout percentage, walk rate. I mean, the extension he gets down the mound is elite, which makes him really, really good. It's dynamic. It's completely dynamic what Garrett Crochet can do on the mound. And again, there's still questions about the durability. He's only done this once, about the injury history. I get all of that. But it's just electric stuff from the left side. He's got a fastball. He throws 97, 98. Opponents hit 198 against it. Gets good extension. It's got good ride. It's an incredible pitch. Then his cutter got hit around a little bit, but has good whiff rates. Then you throw in his sweeper, which is just devastating to lefties. 43% whiff rate against his sweeper this year. That's just by every hitter. Left-handers swung and missed 59% of the time against Crochet's sweeper this season. That is a ridiculous number. Again, if they swung 5 times at the sweeper, they missed 3 out of 5 times. That's insane what he was doing with that pitch. He'll attack righties with the four-seamer and the cutter a lot. It's an incredible mix. It's incredible stuff. It's a clean delivery. It's ridiculous what he can do. He's got the cutter. He's got the changeup. He's got the sinker to go in there with it. And again, he's going to be so cheap. He would help your rotation so much. Again, he works a little bit more than Fried does in terms of that lefty theory about it, things just working out with the big wall in left field at Camden Yards. He fits that a little bit better. Would obviously be much, much cheaper in terms of money. And that's great too. Maybe a little less of an issue, you would think, now with the Orioles' new ownership. But the flip side of Garrett Crochet, and that is kind of the red flag here, is that it's going to cost you. Besides the red flags of this might have been all fool's gold and maybe his body breaks down, maybe he's not able to do this again as a starter, we've only seen it once in the big leagues, all that stuff, it's also really going to cost you. Garrett Crochet is by far going to be the most coveted trade piece this offseason. And again, he's going to make $3 million next year. The White Sox are going nowhere. He's got 2 years of control left, not just one. I mean, he looks like an ace. If he can do it again, he's going to be an all-star starter and an ace. That is going to cost you a whole lot. And again, it's not just going to be the Orioles and a couple of teams checking in. It's going to be almost everybody that is a contending team that needs pitching, at the very least checking in with the White Sox to see what this costs. And while the Orioles still have a good farm system, this is not the farm system it was 2 years ago. The Orioles have graduated guys. They've traded away guys to get talent. They're closer to a middle-of-the-pack farm system at this point, which is fine, as long as your major league team's good, which is the case, but it makes it a little tougher to pull off these big-time trades. And when they propose this to the White Sox, they're going to start that conversation by asking for Samuel Basallo or Kobe Mayo, or maybe both. And the Orioles are going to have to factor in, maybe it is only one of those two, but are we willing to give up Mayo or Basallo to go get Crochet for 2 years? And then you also have to think about, would it be more worth it if we're willing to extend Garrett Crochet? Then does it become more worth it to give up Mayo or Basallo in a trade like that? And maybe it is for this Orioles team. And I would be a little wary of trading Samuel Basallo or Kobe Mayo. I say every year, every single year you get to go into the season having 3 prospects that you can say, I will not trade these guys for anyone. And then otherwise you should be willing to trade pretty much anybody to make your big league team better, especially if you have a team that can win the World Series, which the Orioles will again. I'm going to say for this year, my 3 prospects are probably Kobe Mayo, Samuel Basallo, and Enrique Bradfield Jr. Those are probably my 3 guys going into next year, and anybody else, go for it. So it would be a little tough for me to part with those guys. But Garrett Crochet, the ceiling is so high. maybe you want to see more. Maybe you'd wait till the deadline. You want to see another half season of this before you give up a lot to get Garrett Crochet to make sure he can do it for a second year in a row. But man, oh man, him in Baltimore would be an unbelievable fit at the top of that rotation. It's just about, and we don't kind of know this yet. Maybe we'll start to know this over the coming month or two when, maybe some offers get leaked or what the White Sox asking price gets leaked or whatever it may be. We're probably going to have a White Sox expert here on this show this offseason to talk about the cost of Garrett Crochet. But man, oh man, if the O's can work out a deal, that would be something to have at the top of their rotation. And the Orioles are going to be looking for mainly pitching this offseason, but it wasn't just pitching so far that the O's have been connected to. They're still going to be looking for some bats, you would think. And there was another all-star on the hitting side who would be a perfect fit for the O's, especially if Anthony Santander is not back in Baltimore. And that is Teoscar Hernandez. We'll talk about his fit with the O's to finish off the pod coming up next. But first, this episode of the Locked On Orioles podcast is also brought to you by Game Time. Game Time has a new feature called Game Time Picks that makes getting tickets to see your favorite teams play live even easier. Game Time Picks filters out the fluff to show you only incredible deals on great seats, so you don't have to waste time searching through thousands of tickets. And Game Time Picks the curation. It makes it easier to save more on sports. But listen, we're in the baseball offseason. Yeah, you can get basketball and football and hockey tickets over there, of course, but they've got concert tickets, comedy tickets, theater tickets, anything you want to enjoy in the offseason, Game Time's got you covered. And they've got their lowest price guarantee, or Game Time will credit you 110% of the difference. So take the guesswork out of buying tickets with Game Time Picks. Download the Game Time app, create an account, and use code LOCKEDONMLB for $20 off your first purchase. Terms apply. Again, create an account and redeem code LOCKEDONMLB. That is LOCKEDONMLB for $20 off. Download Game Time today. What time is it? Game time. So for the Orioles, the final all-star that they have been connected to, at least in the past couple of days, is Teoscar Hernandez. And now, take this one with a grain of salt, because it was John Morosi of MLB Network who reported that the Orioles are interested in Teoscar Hernandez. And I'm not saying Morosi is a bad reporter. He gets some things right. He is to be trusted sometimes, but he's always been a little bit of, let's just say, a reporter who tweets something as a report that's more so just common sense. Yes, of course, this team is interested in this player. Why would they not be? Yes, he would be someone who would tweet something like the Orioles are interested in adding to their starting rotation this offseason. Yeah, duh. But when he tweeted that Shohei Ohtani was on the plane to Toronto to sign with the Blue Jays last offseason, that's when he really took a step way down for me. So take it with a grain of salt, but it's also something where it would make sense the Orioles would be interested in Teoscar Hernandez. Now, Hernandez really had a huge season this year, and he's no stranger to having a big season at the plate. But he had been with Houston early in his career, then was traded to Toronto, and we know him in the AL East, had some great years for the Blue Jays, had a 142 WRC plus in 2020, 132 in 2021, 130 in 2022. He dominated the Orioles at times, big-time power hitter, slugged the ball in the gaps for doubles, hit the ball over the wall. Yeah, struck out a little bit too much, but the power could overcome it. I mean, he hit 296 despite those strikeouts in 2021. But then he signed with Seattle last year and just didn't really hit. And then he got a big-time one-year, $20 million deal with the Dodgers and was a huge part of that team getting to the World Series. I mean, you could argue he had his best career offensive season in 2024 with LA. He just turned 32 last month, so next year will be his age 32 season. And this year he was great. 154 games, 652 plate appearances. He hit 272, 339 on base, 501 slug, a 134 WRC plus, 8.1% walk rate, the highest of his career in a full season, or the second highest of his career, I should say, in a full season. 28% strikeout rate, was actually down from last year in Seattle, which was nice to see as well. Dude just mashes the baseball. And again, he's only 32, and that's the big green flag, is he's still hitting homers. 33 home runs was a career high for Teoscar Hernandez this year. He also stole 12 bases. He can still run. He's still got 83rd percentile sprint speed, and he can help you there. Even though he looks kind of like a big lumbering slugger, he can help you on the base paths as well, and hitting 33 home runs. Yeah, you'll take that. And Dodger Stadium, a good park for hitters, and maybe that comes down a little bit for a right-hander in Hernandez if he comes to Oriole Park with the big wall. But man, oh man, would he be a fit, especially if Anthony Santander does not come back, because Hernandez could be slotted right into right field for the O's. And, the other green flag for him might be that, the free agent matrix from John Becker does a great job putting that together, projects 3 years, $69 million for Teoscar Hernandez. $23 million a year is expensive for a guy, but for only 3 years, it's really not a terrible contract to get under, because, you're out of it by the time he's 35. And at that point, maybe he's degrading a little bit, but probably not a lot at that point with how productive he was this year at 31. That could be a huge replacement for Santander in right field. And the other big green flag is, and again, if you're watching here on the Locked On Orioles YouTube channel, you can see, or excuse me, we're not going to see it here. It doesn't look like it's going to come up, but either way, we can talk about Teoscar Hernandez and what he does in terms of just hitting the ball incredibly hard. 14.9% barrel rate for Teoscar Hernandez this year. It's like top 15, basically top 20 in Major League Baseball. 47% hard hit rate is awesome. Yeah, he chases some. Yeah, he swings and misses a good amount. Yeah, he strikes out a good amount, but he also makes enough contact to produce like he does, and that's big time. Now, I would say the biggest red flag for Teoscar Hernandez is, if you don't like Anthony Santander's defense in right field, I would say it's perfectly average. People have said he does just enough to get to the balls he needs to, and that's fine out there. But if you're annoyed already with Santander in right field, you're not going to probably love what Teoscar Hernandez did this year. He had always been a pretty average outfield defender. He was not a guy who was going to win a Gold Glove, but you could generally put him out there and feel fine with what he was going to do. That kind of stopped this year. He had a -9 outs above average and a -11 fielding run value, according to StatCast. He was a bottom 10, bottom 20 defensive player in Major League Baseball this year, mostly playing left field. But if he did come to Baltimore, he would obviously play right field, especially if he was the replacement for Anthony Santander. But here's the silver lining of that. He had a terrible year, but again, he still has 83rd percentile sprint speed. He can still get to baseballs, and he still has really good arm strength. He's got 70th percentile arm strength as well. So you add that with the speed and the arm, he can give you value defensively. And it's much easier to play right field at Camden Yards, just not as much ground to cover, things to get to with the shorter porch with the scoreboard out there in right. I still think, despite the bad year defensively, he could handle his own in right field at Camden Yards and just handle his own in general. O's could rotate him through, getting him some DH at bats as well to keep him out of the outfield, at least not all the time. And with the bat that he would give you, again, from the right side, where the Orioles, and some of this was because of injuries, but some because of production, were missing some big right-handed thump last year, Teoscar Hernandez would give that to you. And I get, a position player for 3 years, $69 million. If you're going to give that to Teoscar, why not give it to Santander? I'm on board with that. I would give that exact contract to Anthony Santander to bring him back. But Teoscar Hernandez actually has a better track record as a hitter than Santander has. So if you get him, you might be upgrading that lineup a little bit as well. It would give you some thump, and a guy, again, who just had some time all the way to winning a World Series. That postseason experience could help with this team and this lineup as well that fell flat in the playoffs. Will be a very nice addition to get Teoscar. And this is going to continue throughout the offseason. The O's are going to be linked to guys. We're going to be talking about basically every free agent the O's could bring in over these next couple of weeks to really get you primed for the offseason. Because again, some minor moves happen here and there, but really until that first week of December when the winter meetings happen, you don't see a lot of moves. It's mostly just rumors for about a month now, and we'll have you covered with all of them here on the podcast. And we will be back tomorrow. It looks like we'll be continuing our Orioles 2024 Player Season Review Series. Let's talk about Ryan Mountcastle on tomorrow's episode. Speaking of a right-handed hitter with power, Ryan Mountcastle kind of used to be that, but then his power got zapped this year. He stopped pulling the ball. What happened with Mountcastle, and could he be a trade candidate for the Orioles this offseason? We'll get to that on tomorrow's episode. But until then, I'm Connor Newcomb, and this has been the Locked On Orioles podcast, part of the Locked On Podcast Network. Your team every day.